The elephant looks too small to do serious damage. Nevertheless, it weighs nearly half a ton. It's being released in Kagera National Park, Rwanda. The young elephant is angry and confused. Uncharacteristically for a calf, it's about to make a charge which is not bluff. It rushes straight at the camera. In seconds, the girl behind the camera is crushed and killed. Her name was Lee Lyon. This is her story, and that of the film that cost Lee her life. Lee came from California. She was 29. She was dark and slight, and always claimed she had Red Indian blood. She had that look of health and energy that stored sunshine often gives a pretty girl. She was an accomplished skin diver as well as a climber. These scenes were taken when she was part of a survival team filming in the Sea of Cortez off Mexico in 1969. On that expedition, she was starting to learn to use a movie camera. She also helped the scientists collect specimens, including plankton. She was completely at home in the outdoors. On the same trip, she fished for marlin, not primarily for sport, although she obviously enjoyed it. The marlin were needed for tagging experiments. Above all, Lee had a gentle and sympathetic, though not sentimental, way with wildlife. During the 4 months when the survival team were isolated on the Arctic tundra filming snow geese, she applied this natural sympathy to many creatures, including a phalarope chick that would otherwise have died because its egg hatched later than the rest. She persuaded the parent bird to return and brood it. From the Arctic, survival sent her as assistant to cameraman Dieter Plager to one of the hottest places in the world, the Danakil Desert of Ethiopia. Few women had ever been there before. The tribesmen still quite often murder and mutilate strangers. These are some of the stills she took of those Danakil nomads. Though essentially tough-minded and self-sufficient, Lee managed to remain feminine, even when helping to film gorillas in the rainforests of Zaire. A year ago, she was given her first solo film assignments. Both were in the Virunga National Park, Zaire. The first was to have been about the vast concentrations of hippo in the park and their problems. These are scenes Lee shot for films that may now never be completed. The second story concerned a fishing village where birds, hippos and elephants live side by side with the fishermen. Lee wasn't a girl to take unnecessary risks. She'd been trained to regard all large wild animals as potentially lethal. Even this seemingly tame elephant she filmed in the fishing village. She'd already worked for 3 months with the survival team filming wild elephant herds at Manyara, Tanzania. She knew their power and speed, as her classic still of a charging female shot at Manyara shows. While in Zaire, she was asked to cover an unusual elephant movement operation in neighboring Rwanda. A brilliant pilot, she flew immediately with all her camera gear to the location. Here, in tribute to her dedication and courage, is the film she shot right up until the moment at which she died in what can only be regarded as a freak accident. Rwanda lies between Zaire to the west and Tanzania to the east. It's one of the smallest countries in Africa, with a total area of only 10,000 square miles. From this altitude, it looks a wilderness of lakes and wooded hills. This is very far from the truth. It's not only one of the smallest countries, but one of the most densely peopled, with a population of 4 million and still growing fast. Almost every inch of land is cultivated to provide subsistence crops. If there's hardly room and food enough for people, there certainly isn't any of either to spare for elephants. Elephants have raided this banana plantation. It's easy to understand why elephants are not popular with Rwanda's farmers, fighting for their own survival. Until recently, Rwanda had one elephant herd, 150 strong. It lived in a swamp right in the middle of one of the most heavily farmed areas. One way or another, the elephant herd was doomed. It was doomed because the farmers understandably shot and snared the elephants to protect their crops. But it was also doomed because the farmers cut down all the trees on which the elephants lived to make room for more crops for themselves. It's easy to criticize the wastefulness of farming methods that burn down trees, not even saving the wood for charcoal making. But then, we're not living with the desperate need to grow enough food to keep our families alive. A crop of beans has sprouted almost before the trees have stopped smouldering. This shows the urgency of the African farmer's problem. But what of the elephants? After consulting wildlife experts, Rwanda's president gave orders to shoot the adults. They couldn't be moved anyway. The calves, however, could be saved and moved to Kagera National Park. So a highly experienced capture team from Kenya moved in. The first part was a perfectly bloody shooting operation which nobody liked. As it turned out, half the adults and some of the calves were better out of the way. Many had old festering bullet wounds. Quite a few had snare wire embedded in trunks and legs, horrible relics of injuries received during former crop raids. However, if only 20 calves could be saved, the operation might be justified. Once the killing was over, the capture of the calves could begin. So vet Jerry Haig loaded his darts with the immobilizing drug. Like everyone else involved, Lee Lyon had found the operation to date pretty horrible. She had a great love for elephants. What had encouraged her to film the story at all was that helicopters were to be used in a unique way. Choppers have taken part many times before in capture operations, but never quite in the role they were to play here. Once the adults had been killed, the calves had to be darted as quickly as possible. The dart injects the drug like a large hypodermic syringe, and the calf quietly collapses. Stakes are driven in to hold the animal to prevent any risk of it escaping into the papyrus swamp when it comes round. The vet tethers it to the stakes. Darts are removed from the thick hide. The African assistant prepares a shot of penicillin and anti-stress drug. Dart and all other wounds are treated against infection. Water is poured over the calf to keep it cool, and since it can't flap its own ears, one of an elephant's main cooling aids, they're flapped for it. This is all routine. But now we come to what is unique about this capture operation. The only open space where holding pens could be built was several miles away down the twisting Nyabarongo River. Earlier reconnaissance of the herd in the swamp had suggested the capture team might succeed in rescuing as many as 30 calves. So a large number of bomas, or holding pens, had been built to house their reluctant guests. The bomas of the place called Rinzoka must have been the most ambitious orphanage ever built in Africa. With such a high population density, there was no shortage of labor to build the pens. The team was greatly encouraged by the number of large calves they'd captured. The bigger the young elephants, the better their chance of survival in a world where there would be no adults to look after them. These calves were now the only elephants left alive in Rwanda. Nor was there any prospect of introducing any fully grown elephants to act as nursemaids. They probably wouldn't accept strange youngsters anyway. The problems of transportation from other parts of Africa would be too immense and too costly. The problems of transporting even the calves to the holding area were quite large enough. But African capture teams are nothing if not resourceful. To carry the rescued animals to the bomas, they built a stout tubular steel cage and a special catamaran type of raft. The manpower needed to get a medium-sized calf aboard reveals the youngster's tremendous strength. A final injection of tranquilizer, and the voyage downriver to the bomas can begin. No problem about keeping the cooling system topped up during the voyage. Many of the Africans who turned up to help had probably never seen a wild elephant before. They'd certainly never seen one as close as this. Cage and elephant were soon pulled ashore. It's probably idle to speculate what an elephant feels at times like this. However else it may react, it must be totally confused. It can have no inkling that everything that is being done for it and to it is for its own eventual survival. Small wonder, therefore, that it's necessary to confine it in a holding area for a long period of settling down and acclimatization. From her letters and reports, it was obvious that these thoughts occurred to Lee Lyon as she filmed all this. Undoubtedly, she'd rather have been filming elephants living free and in the wild. But it was a dramatic story with the best of motives. And the most dramatic part of the movement operation still lay ahead. The helicopters of the Rwanda Air Force had now arrived. The original plan had been to move most of the captured calves out of the swamp by air. But there's a limit to what even a powerful military helicopter can be asked to carry, especially when its load is alive and dangling beneath it. So the biggest calves had gone by river. It was the first time such an unorthodox airlift had been tried, and the main reason Lee Lyon was covering the story. The advantage of using the chopper was that the orphans could be transferred to the holding pens with the minimum of delay and shock caused by being tied up after capture. Each baby elephant, heavily tranquilized, was wrapped in a padded rope harness onto which the helicopter winch wire was hooked. One's first reaction on watching a baby elephant flying is, understandably, amusement, to compare it to Dumbo. Again, it's impossible to measure the elephant's reaction, to record what shock it feels. One has to cling on to the thought, and as tightly as one crew member hung on to Lee Lyon's legs when she took these incredible shots, that being carried like this is the baby elephant's only hope of being carried to at least a chance of safety. Conservation often seems to demand a too heavy price from those it saves. Fortunately, as can be seen from the baby's waving trunk and ears, it is drugged out of its tiny pachydermatous mind. On the way to the bomas, the helicopter passes over one of the bigger calves making its way by river. Still fully tranquilized, the baby is fairly easily persuaded to enter the boma. One of the first problems with newly captured animals, especially young ones, is to get them to eat. Extremely prickly thornbush proved the best diet. Other green leaves seemed to give them wind. For 3 days, there was a constant stream of new arrivals. Many of the babies were still being breastfed when their mothers were shot. A mixture of powdered milk and mealy meal produced the right fat content, and the infants accepted it readily. Elephants are highly individual characters. They differ in the way they adjust to violent situations such as capture. This is Minus, the first and one of the smallest calves carried by helicopter. The younger the animal, the more quickly it usually settles. Minus was no exception, quickly becoming extremely tame. The calves were to be given at least 3 weeks to settle down. Meantime, preparations were made for their reception on a 1.5-mile-long headland in Lake Hago in Rwanda's Kagera National Park. There are no other elephants in the park to protect the young, but unfortunately plenty of lions. The headland was sealed off with an electric fence to keep the lions out. Safely confined with plenty of food, it was hoped that the calves would gradually form into herds of their own. Preparations included trying to drive thousands of buffalo off the headland. The attempt was only partly successful. Luckily, buffalo and elephant are not serious competitors for food. When moving day eventually arrived, Mutware, the biggest male captured, tried everything he knew to smash his cage, although when finally released, he behaved fairly calmly. Chiquita, the smallest elephant calf, behaved calmly from the start, just as well. She was too young to be released yet and would be kept for a whole year while she was weaned off milk. Mutware continued to demonstrate forcibly. While all this was going on, Chiquita wandered about the camp as if all the rumpus was no concern of hers. As Mutware was at last winched onto his trailer, Chiquita decided to raid the capture team's kitchen tent. A second large calf goes aboard the trailer with far less trouble. Now the first two pairs of elephants are ready for the 2-hour drive to Kagera National Park. All the way to Kagera, the convoy drives between shambas, the small farms that provide Rwanda's huge and growing population with food. This is country that was once owned by elephants and all kinds of large animals, but where wild animals no longer have a place. PNK, Parc National Kagera. Not perhaps an impressive sign, but one that welcomes the visitor to the only place in Rwanda where buffalo, lion, zebra, and huge herds of impala still roam free. This day, the sign bids welcome in several languages to 4 total strangers. The first 4 elephants seen in Kagera since the last wild one was killed there many years ago. For Kagera, the occasion was a very special one. For the capture team, it was all very much routine. The sort of release they'd all done many times before. The first few releases were to go exactly to plan. The trailer was backed down into the unloading pit, the door of the cage removed, and the first calf allowed to find its way to freedom. The first calves behaved exactly as expected. After a small demonstration, they strolled away into the bush. During the releases, no one in the capture team took any chances, nor apparently did Lee Lyon. She was 30 yards away, 3 feet in front of her car, with the door open for escape if necessary. There was no sign that escape would be necessary. Nor on this occasion was it. It was a week later when a large calf charged directly at her. She remained filming, alas, just a few seconds too long. There are now 25 young elephants living in Kagera Park, with a better than even chance that they will survive and eventually breed. Lee Lyon would have been delighted about that. Someone who meant well said when he heard of her death, "It seems such a waste of a life." It's doubtful whether Lee herself would have agreed. She was doing what she liked best, in the sort of place she liked best. And as her last film shows, she was doing it superbly well.